Hi everyone, Shabbat Shalom. I want to share with you a interesting insight based on this week's Torah portion and an insight of Yeshaya Leibovitz. Yeshaya Leibovitz asks the following question on this week's Torah portion, BeShalach. He says there's really two sections of the Parsha. The first section is about the miraculous, primarily when the Jewish people get to the sea, the Egyptians are behind them, and God then splits the sea for them. They walk through on dry ground, and of course at the other end of the sea, they sing about that miracle. They sing the song of the sea, the Shir, and they're filled with praise for God. The second half of the Parsha is far more mundane. Right? It begins their journeys in the desert, just getting food to survive. There's a lot more day-to-day needs that are fulfilled without the same grandeur of the miracle of splitting the sea and the song of praise that follows that. So Yeshaya Leibovitz, on that insight, asked the following question. He says, why do we emphasize the first part of the Parsha, the first part of the story, which talks all about that miraculous splitting of the sea? He's right, of course, that we do emphasize it. Not only is it this major part of the Torah reading this week, but when we get to it, many people have the custom of standing for it. We have a special tune to make sure that we sing it in a beautiful way. And not only that, we recall this particular act, this particular miracle, every day in the morning prayers and when we stand again. So there's a great deal of emphasis on this particular act. And he says, why should we do so? And he has a good point. He quotes the Rambam, for example. It says that very often miracles, and particularly this miracle, do not have a long-lasting impact. In the Guide for the Perplexed, the Rambam wrote, Maimonides writes, that yes, this is a tremendous miracle, the splitting of the sea, but it was a one-time event in terms of the impact it had. Those people who experienced it, who walked through the Red Sea, okay, so they were transformed by that experience. But for subsequent generations, it didn't really influence their faith. It didn't really influence their coming closer to God. It was a story for them, an important story, true, but it didn't really have a transformative impact on their life and their sense of faith and their closeness to God. The Meshech Chochmah actually goes a step further. It says, in his understanding, not only did this miracle not have a subsequent impact on future generations, it's questionable whether or not it even had an impact on that generation, on the generation that experienced the miracle itself. Notice that when they get to the other side, what do they begin doing? They complain. And part of the reason why they complain is because there wasn't a development of faith. The Meshech Chochmah notes, for example, later on in the Torah talks to the Jewish people and says to them, as it were, it says, now, in God's voice, now you have a heart that understands. You have eyes that see and ears that hear. And the Meshech Chochmah understands that phrase to mean that now, after wandering the desert, after feeling God's presence on a day-to-day basis in the mundane activities of everyday life, now they've developed the proper sense of faith and closeness and the relationship with God to feel God on a more powerful way. And they have that faith, and they develop that faith over a long period of time. But at the miracle and the splitting of the sea, they hadn't developed it. They didn't yet have a heart that understood, or eyes that really saw, or ears that really heard. So he says, even for that generation, since they didn't go through the hard work of developing faith, but rather they were simply recipients, beneficiaries of a miraculous act, they didn't actually develop what they needed to develop in terms of their emunah, in terms of their faith with God. So Yeshaya Leibovitz's question is a good one. Why should we have such an emphasis on an act as powerful and meaningful as it was, that is not long-lasting, and maybe didn't even have a full impact on the people who experienced it directly? So to answer that question, I want to share with you an interesting scientific experiment that I read a little while ago. It has to do with two scientists that come to just your ordinary beach. They come dressed up as beachgoers, and they put out a blanket, like they're going to enjoy the beach, as well as, this experiment must have taken place in the old days, a big radio, right, a boombox that they put down next to them. So the first scientist comes, and he puts down his towel, he puts down his radio, and then he goes into the beach. Then there are co-conspirators in this experiment. They come along and they pretend to steal the radio, right? They take it. They're very conspicuous about it. They make sure that other beachgoers who are in the area see what they're doing, and they take the radio with them. When they did the experiment, the first 20 times, only 4 other onlookers who were at the beach, stood up and said anything to perhaps prevent the theft of the radio. Only 4 were at all interested in stepping forward and trying to prevent the theft. Then the second experimenter comes. The second scientist comes along with his towel, his radio. He puts it out, and again, we're going to have 20 different people, the same type of people involved in the experiment. This time, however, 19 out of the 20 step forward, and some of them even are prepared to get involved in a physical altercation in order to stop the thief from taking the radio. What was the difference in the second time they did the experiment? Only one thing. When the experimenter put down his towel and his radio, he turned to the people nearby and said, "Please watch my stuff for me." And then he left. In other words, the only thing that made a difference is that he asked. He asked people to get involved. And I'd like to suggest that asking, that challenge of getting people involved, makes all the difference and can help explain our question from before. What's the most important line in the Song of the Sea, the song that the Jewish people sing when they get to the other side of the sea and praising God? Almost all the commentaries agree that the most important line is Ze Eli Va'anvehu. This is my God, and I will glorify God. I will now glorify Him. And this is the source of the custom that we have of making our fulfillment of all the commandments glorious, right? Yeah, you can light Shabbat candles in a very simple way, but glorify it. Make the mitzvah, make the commandment more beautiful. Get a beautiful candelabra. Whatever mitzvah you end up doing, try to make it a little bit nicer, a little bit more beautiful, as a form of glorifying God based upon this event. Ze Eli Va'anvehu, this is my God, and I will glorify Him. Now, the word anvehu is not really that common, but there are some other possible understandings of it. For example, perhaps it's based on the word naveh, which means an abode or a residence. In that case, the way you would understand it is Ze Eli Va'anvehu, this is my God, and I will build a residence for this God. In other words, the Jewish people were so enthralled by what took place at the sea, they promised right then and there to build a Beit HaMikdash, a temple in the future, in Jerusalem, for God. Abba Shaul in the Gemara offers one other possibility, and I think it's perhaps the most compelling one. He says the word anvehu is a abbreviation for ani vehu. And the way you're supposed to read it is, this is my God, and ani vehu, I, or any human being, and who, God, are partners in this whole process. Ani vehu, we're going through life together, and we are commanded to emulate God, because ani vehu, I will follow after Him. I will follow after His model and His example. So if God is merciful, then I will be merciful. Just as God, the Gemara tells us, clothes the naked, right, with Adam and Eve, providing clothing for them when they were naked. So I will also clothe the naked. And God buries the dead. I will bury the dead. And God provides food for the hungry. I will provide. Ani vehu means that I am going to follow in God's footsteps. God will provide us the model, and I will then, as a human being, follow along that model. And that takes place even at the splitting of the sea. Remember, the Egyptians are about to destroy the Jewish people. And the Jewish people are terrified and fearful. And what does God say? Stand back. I will fight them. I will take care of this battle. Now you might think, a la Yeshaya Leibovitz, this is a terrible thing, right? This is a miracle that's God performing. And we're not at all involved, and it's not going to develop faith at all. But if you read it this way, ani vehu, that we're doing this together, God is giving us the model. I will fight against the Egyptians now. You step back. You don't have to be involved. But only now. This is a one-time event. I will defeat them. And I'm providing you the model that you now have to do the exact same thing. And indeed, if you look at the end of the Torah portion, when Amalek attacks the Jewish people, that's exactly what happens. Moshe tells the Jewish people, okay, now let's get men together and fight them. Right? Amalek attacks the weak and those that are left behind, the stragglers. And we, in a sense, learn from the beginning of the story, where God protects the defenseless Jewish people, that we now are going to defend the defenseless as well. That's what ani vehu, that's the real glory of that song. It's not the miracle itself that God performed, but rather it's the model that God provides us that we then have to take as a challenge. God is asking us to participate. We take as a challenge for the rest of our lives. That connects the first part of the Parsha, the miraculous, with the second part, the mundane. We take the miraculous and realize that we have to be performing the same type of miracles, but in the real world.